Hey, Boaz here with Next Pittsburgh, and we're here in Washington County to go behind the scenes at Meadowcroft Rockshelter. And to show us around, we've got the director, Dave Scofield, here. Dave, thanks for having us.
Oh, sure. Thanks for coming out, Boaz.
So I see we're already standing in front of a little gate sort of
Yeah.
fence, and we're going to get to go to
We're
the other
going to
side.
go in, take a little closer look. So we're under the enclosure that is protecting the Meadowcroft Rock Shelter, the National Historic Landmark archaeological site that has provided evidence of people on this spot 19,000 years ago.
And so, how do you know it was 19,000 years ago? Is that through, carbon dating?
It is. It's based on radiocarbon dating from from charcoal that's been recovered from fire pits here.
Wow, that's wild. And that like blew people's mind when they discovered it because they didn't think there were humans on this continent at that time.
Yeah, it was in direct opposition to the paradigm at the time in the 1970s that suggested people had only been in North America for about 13,000 years. The first excavation took place in 1973. By 1974, that first radiocarbon dates came back from the Smithsonian, and everyone was astonished, including Dr. James Adovasio, who was the principal investigator and remains so today. He expected evidence at the site going back maybe 4,000 years. This would have been really an ideal place to camp. So it faces south, so it takes advantage of the heat from the sun. It's high enough above the creek that they didn't have to worry about flooding in here.
But close enough to go get food or hop in a boat or something.
Exactly. And the overhanging rock ledge provided shelter from the weather. You can see the back rock wall there. That's the depth of the site. But that overhanging rock ledge extended all the way out to where we're standing prehistorically.
Yeah. So what can we see? I see there are a lot of little tags down there.
Yeah, all these tags indicate either a particular level of the site or where there's a particular feature. So one that I want to point out to you is over in this area. This little kind of saddle-shaped feature is a fire pit. It's half of a fire pit. That's a fire pit.
Takes a lot of imagination. How do you know that's a fire pit?
Well, if you were up close to that, you would see little bits of charcoal and ash. But that's a fire pit that was constructed here at the end of the last ice age. So that is an ice age fire pit.
When is that? Like 10,000 years ago or something?
More than that. So 11, 12,000 years ago. This area that you're looking at is what we call the deep hole. So because it's the deepest part of the site, it's where the oldest evidence has been recovered. One of the signature artifacts from the site is what's called the Miller lanceolate point. And I brought this is a cast of the Miller point that is a 14,000-year-old stone spear point that was recovered here. And when this was found in 1976, this was the oldest artifact to be found in North America, a human artifact to be found in North America.
Wow. So presumably they would have used this to hunt whatever animals were living here back then.
Right. This would have been affixed to either a spear or a long dart that's thrown with a tool called an atlatl. And that was the hunting technology of the time.
Wow. And so what other remains and pieces of things are you finding here?
So there were 20,000 artifacts recovered from the site. In addition to that, there were 956,000 animal remains. So
Who's counting all this stuff? That seems like such tedious work.
well, it's important scientific information,
Yeah.
and that represents 150 species of animals. So pretty much anything that was here over the course of those 19,000 years is represented here.
Are you finding evidence of things that are extinct?
The only extinct species from this site is the passenger pigeon. So this area that we're standing in right now represents the office space for the excavation during those
You're
major...
going to say the office space of the prehistoric humans you lived here.
No, for the archaeologists that were studying the prehistoric people. But this was, at one time, the rock walls were lined with 1970s paneling. There were shelves and file cabinets. And right here, there was a computer terminal that was connected via acoustical modem to the University of Pittsburgh mainframe computer. this was one of the first, if not the first, archaeological site that used a computer in the field. They were entering data here on site that was going back to the University of Pittsburgh mainframe.
Wow.
That was cutting edge technology in the mid 70s.
Very cool. And so, can you talk a little about how Albert Miller, this was his farm, and he stumbled across this and
absolutely.
realized he had something
In
unusual?
fact, I'm going to show you the location of that groundhog hole that he found right here in 1955. So November 12th, 1955, Albert Miller was walking through here. He saw the groundhog had excavated a fresh hole. And in what the groundhog had excavated were some artifacts. And so Albert knew that his theory that prehistoric people used this site was correct.
Well, how did he even have that theory to begin with?
Albert was an amateur archaeologist, and he knew what rock shelters were. So he went home, he got a shovel and a screen and enlarged that hole. And he found more. He found burnt bone, he found flint flakes, and when he got to 30 inches deep, he found an intact flint knife. So he knew he was right, and he was wise enough to know that he should keep quiet about it. Because if people knew that there were Indian artifacts here, it would most likely be looted and destroyed. So he covered it up, kept quiet about it, and spent 18 years trying to find a professional archaeologist to do this professionally. So in 1973, a new faculty member at the University of Pittsburgh, James Adavasio, was looking for a site to do a field school. And so in 1973, they did the first professional excavation. So you can imagine that the ground surface before any excavation took place would have come up right through here about waist level. And right where you're standing, Boaz, there was a fire pit that was still being used by the local kids in the 1970s. Wow. And so it had all the party paraphernalia from 1970s activity here. And the whole chronology of beer can technology. And that fire pit was excavated back to an 18th century level. So for the last 200 years of this site's history, this was the center of activity under that overhanging roof. Right. Yeah. So if you look at the profiles here and imagine that as a vertical timeline, if you were to look at all of the major world history events that we all learned about in school, like the rise and fall of the Roman Empire, the building of the Great Pyramids, the building of Machu Picchu, all of those things would be up near the top of our timeline. Because this site goes back so much farther.
Well, it seems like Meadowcroft in some ways is a time machine here. And here you have evidence of people living here, up to 19,000 years ago, but then you also have things that are more recent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we tell that whole story from 19,000 years ago to the 19th century primarily, looking at different periods of time, snapshots in time where there were big ideas that made changes for the way people lived.
So now we've moved forward a couple thousand years, and what are we looking at here, Dave?
Yeah, so this is our recreated 16th century Monongahela Indian village. So we're looking at a time period when agriculture has been developed in our part of the world around 3,000 years ago. And so this allowed people to settle in villages year-round, and no longer did they have to follow the food across the landscape.
And so when you say they were doing agriculture, like what kind of things were they growing?
The staples were corn, beans, and squash. It's what the Indian people refer to as the Three Sisters. In these villages, they would have cleared many acres to grow their crops.
And then what are these structures over here?
Yeah, so this again is based on archaeological evidence from the region. There have been many of these Monongahela Indian villages excavated. There are these wigwams, circular dwellings, and as well as rectangular dwellings like you see over here as well, covered with either reed matting or animal skin, even sheets of bark harvested off of large trees.
And so you're just sort of doing your best to put this together based on the archaeological evidence you've seen, because you're not sure what happened to this sort of group of people.
Right, it is somewhat of a mystery. They disappeared before Europeans arrived, and so it's not really known exactly what happened to them. There are variety of theories about it, but we know that in the 18th century, when Europeans arrived, these people weren't here. And so there were other tribes that were being pushed west by European settlement. And so they were present here and then continued to be pushed west as settlement occurred on this side of the Alleghenies.
And so was this schoolhouse built here, or was it moved from somewhere else?
All these buildings were moved here. And
Just imagine Albert driving around in his car. He's like, "What's that one? What's that collapsing schoolhouse? Put it in the back of the truck."
well, this one was also from the Miller family farm.
Oh wow!
It was built as a direct result of the Pennsylvania Common School Law that passed in 1834. And so that provided for public education, and all the townships started to build their own little schoolhouses. And so this one was built right on the property line between the Miller farm and the neighboring farm, and was used from roughly 1835 until 1921. And then when Albert was developing Meadowcroft, he wanted to include the schoolhouse, so he moved it here to be part of what he called Meadowcroft Village.
What is this? Does this ring a bell? This
It does. And now here's part of your behind the scenes look at Meadowcroft. You can actually ring the bell.
Oh my gosh, okay, here we go. Get the mic up here. Do you hear that, Annie? Gosh, very cool.
Yeah, so that would be to call the kids back to school. And this is set up the way a schoolhouse would have been set up in the 19th century.
You got your chalkboards, you're writing your answers on there, you got your little handkerchiefs to erase it. What else do you need?
Yeah, absolutely. And you'll notice the different sized desks. So one of the characteristics of a one-room school is that you have all the different grade levels in one room. So the teacher is teaching different levels of all subjects to the students here.
And I see there's smoke coming out of the chimney over
Yeah,
here.
so Andrew is in the blacksmith shop, and we'll take a look, see what he's up to. So this is Andrew Donovan, and Andrew has been doing blacksmithing here for a number of years and also serves as our education and program manager.
And how did you get into blacksmithing?
I moved back to Western Pennsylvania from Arizona and needed a job, and Meadowcroft was hiring a blacksmith. So,
And you had no experience?
no, I had some like general shop experience and that sort of stuff, but actually working with a forge, I did not have experience.
In the process of learning to become a blacksmith, do you get burned a lot?
Minor burns, yeah.
I just imagine there's got to be a learning curve.
It's been a long time since I've had to deal with a burn. But yeah, you definitely have to learn to keep track of what metal is just came out of the fire.
What's like the hardest thing you've made or the most challenging project?
The most challenging thing is symmetry. I took this project on the second year I was here in the blacksmith shop. So that's a toaster. Put your bread in the plate there, then you can spin it. So trying to get all four of these to match relatively was tough.
Challenge. Well, I'll say goodbye to the sound of mechanical bellows going in the background. It's really romantic. Thanks so much for showing us around, Dave.
All right. Well, you're welcome. And so you can see we have 19,000 years of history represented on this piece of property. And through those various interpretive areas that we visited, we tell that story through snapshots in time.